Welcome to the show, Sean Baxter.
Hey, Jeff. I'm so happy to be here today and dig deep and learn a bit about you. And I'm kind of interested if you can just take us like way back to the beginning. How did you get going in this contracting world?
Well, you're jumping right in. I love it. I love it. So let me go all the way back. I grew up in a family business. I call it the green industry, but it was the swimming pool industry. And, my grandfather started the family into that industry. And then my uncle had a business. And then my dad worked for my uncle before he started his own. And I grew up when my dad was working for my uncle. They lived next door. And we were a close family, Sunday dinners together with my grandfather and other family members. And we had dinner together every night. I mean, that's just the gold standard. But I will say my father was so deep in the business that he was a bit distant. He wasn't the typical, hey, let's play football father. He was more of an artsy guy and very focused on building the business, although he was working for my uncle at the time. So I learned a lot about business around the dinner table. I mean, just a great pairing of those two things together.
Did you work in the business as a teenager, as a kid?
Sure. Yeah. I like to say I started working at the age of 7. My parents put us to work. And so my first job was emptying the garbage in the house. That's where he started working from, was, in the house. And I got paid 2 pennies, and I had to save half of all my earnings for college. So they would have given me 1 penny if I could have split it in half, but I got 2. One went into the college account and one I went and bought gum with. So I always had to save money, and I always did. I always liked saving money. I invested in stocks as a kid. I used to save money. I remember having this jar painted in gold and stuffed with money. And twice growing up, my dad came and borrowed money from my bank account, swept it clean, took money at least one of the times out of my piggy bank because he needed to make payroll in the business. And so I don't know what that did to my psyche, except it reinforced, hey, saving is a good thing. And also reinforced, business is hard. I remember, I'm sort of jumping ahead, but I remember running the business, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later, but where I couldn't make payroll, or I thought I couldn't make payroll. Those are tough times. They really sear on you. But so age of 13 is when I really started working in the business every day after school, on weekends. I could go out and party, which I did, but I had to be home Saturday or Friday night, because Saturday I had to get up early to go clean swimming pools.
So you clearly learned the art of frugality in your father's business operations, and the way to save, and you put that savings to good work. Where did you go to school? Where did you leave the nest and start getting a higher education?
So I chose Tulane University in New Orleans, which is why I moved back here. And I had a fascination with chemistry and music. And Tulane has a very strong chemical engineering school because of the oil industry down here. And of course, it's known for music. And it turns out I don't love engineering, but I loved what I learned, which is about numbers and thinking. You basically learn how to think, pull apart, solve complex problems. You learn a lot about money and just numbers in engineering. I learned to have a lot of fun. That would be a different podcast. But university was a great time. Really learned a lot about culture. Always surrounded myself with people smarter than me. They're probably not listening, but if they were, I'd mention their names. Really put myself in places to always be learning. not just being challenged by school. I can't believe I studied engineering. I don't think I could actually do that again. What a huge Herculean task. But I definitely learned by making friends with people smarter than me. That was definitely one of my intentions.
I like that you learned how to learn from engineering. That's a really good takeaway from such a difficult line of work that's so process driven. And I now understand the translation, how you applied that to business in the future. So I know this, I've seen this photo. I don't know if everyone listening has, followed your Facebook and your LinkedIn over the years, but I've seen this photo of you floating around at the Berlin Wall as it's coming down, baby on your back. And I just gotta know, how the hell did you get to Europe?
Dang, how did I get to Berlin at the right time?
It's crazy.
So I'm an adventurer, man. I once ran a peer group where we all sat down and said, if we could have any job at any point in time, what would we be doing? And I put myself on like, put me on a ship with Columbus. I'm going to travel across the ocean and go explore. So I'm an adventurer, and luckily the market was soft for jobs when I graduated. So I set sail for Europe, and ultimately I visited over at least 33 countries. I mean, not all when I went there, but been to 33 countries. I learned so much traveling through Europe. I met a woman who was German. So that's how I got to Germany. And my first son was born in Berlin. Let's see, I think it was after the wall fell, but I was there during, so she picked Germany and I got to pick the city. So I picked Berlin. You're going to go to the capital, right? If you're going to go to a new city. And I was West Berlin. So we had to drive through, all the checkpoints. You've heard of Checkpoint Charlie, but when you're driving, you could drive from West Germany to West Berlin, which sits inside of East Germany. And, all the guys with their machine guns, and it was an experience for sure. I mean, again, that's a whole other separate podcast, but what happened when the wall fell and all these people flooded in, and it just changed Berlin forever. And, the rest is history. I'll tell you what, though, shops opened up immediately at the borders buying gold and silver. So people brought their gold and silver over, sold it, got Deutschmarks, and, were able to spend their money.
That is literally the coolest photo I've ever seen of anyone. And it's such a brave move to cross continents and, interject yourself and travel and get going. What from that experience, I think you went to school there too, right?
So the relationship didn't work out as I would have hoped, but I wanted to, basically I wanted to get a serious job while I was there. And you can't really do that as a foreigner. I figured if I went to school there, then I could slip my way into the system. And so I applied and was accepted to MBA school in Holland. And so I went to school there, lived there for 2 more years. So I was there for 4 years. I actually did a semester abroad at the London Business School. So kind of moved me all over the place. And I always loved business, always. And so I loved going to business school there. And then I did corporate consulting for 2 years. And in the corporate consulting, I worked all over Europe, Sweden, Belgium, France, England. So I got to travel, a lot of great stories there. Almost died traveling over the English Channel in a 2-engine prop airplane. And one of the props breaks. I'm watching it. I'm looking out the window and I see this liquid coming out of the engine. And I'm not thinking fast enough. I'm like, what is that liquid? And the prop starts to slow down, stops, and then starts going backwards. And then the whole airplane goes, and it's like, and the pilot has to readjust. It took him like 2 minutes before he got on and says, well, we've had a problem, as you can see, and we're too far across the channel to turn back. So we're going to keep going. I'm kind of cliche. I ordered another drink and we just kept going, and all the fire trucks are out there on the other side of the channel, and, smooth landing. Hey, who knew?
Good pilot.
Yeah, really good pilot. So after I ended living there for 7 years, really like a whole, they say that life happens in 7-year cycles. My grandfather figured that out. If you ever want to go back into your life and just map it out every 7 years. So I was there for 7 years, and, I didn't have a great close relationship with my dad. I mean, it was, like I said, it was sort of distant. I always wanted to work with him as a way to get close to him, because that was his love, was the business. And so I decided to move back to Connecticut and join the business. It had gotten big enough that I thought I could apply what I learned, which I was able to. And so it was about $5 million back then, which would be, bigger in today's dollars. So I rejoined the family business, and I was able to apply my knowledge and work my way up through the business, became the CEO at one point. But ultimately, we had different ideas on strategy, direction, and I had other family members in the business, and I wasn't going to change their mind on where I thought the business should go using all my knowledge and learning. And so ultimately, the business was big enough for me to apply my knowledge, but not big enough. And so it was time to move on. My wife and I decided together, and I loved consulting. I had done it before, was trained at it. And so we decided in 2008 to hang up the shingle and go back into consulting. And so I owned some shares in the business, sold them back to the family. Of course, I now consult on all that, right? You have a good buy sell, you have no choice. They go back to the owners of the business. But that's how we got the consulting business, or that's how it started.
So when you came back and you joined the family business, they were at about $5 million. What was your initial role? What was the scaling spot that they were in that you kind of got back into? And before you started applying what you knew from corporate consulting and all your life experiences, what hit you in the face of like, oh man, these guys need to do this? Where were they at?
You are opening a Pandora's box. I started off in the service area of the business, the part that makes the money, although all of their love was in the install side, because they're builders, pool builders. And, I'm not the guy that grew up on the backhoe, like, you might have, or so many clients.
Sure.
But as my brothers did, and my dad, my dad has great stories of building pools, holding the shotcrete handle. And I joined the service side, and it was very lucrative. It became even more lucrative. And the first thing I did was basically what I tell my clients to do now. I figured out how to take the whole service contract and bundle it as a fixed fee annual price to clients, which revolutionized how we went about doing service. For example, instead of pushing chemicals, sell more. No, they already prepaid. So we want to use less. And so it just sort of flipped the whole model of how we, sold the work, did the work, incentivized the people. Then I did the same in irrigation, the whole fixed fee concept, unit pricing, which you've heard me talk about today, but it's something I figured out early on. So also when I joined, financially, it wasn't doing great. And I picked up on it right away because of my MBA in engineering thinking. And I'm like, we better make some changes now and not wait year end. And, obviously that helped. So I don't know if I answered your question there, but those are some of the initial impacts.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I think most people think is that it had always been a landscaping firm. And in fact, it was a pool business first that you sort of helped usher in I know your dad didn't want others to take credit for the pool because they put the sod down. And so
Yep.
he had already started on the
Well, he
landscape
did.
side.
He did a lot of that. I don't want to take credit from him. He's a visionary, man. You want a definition of a visionary? It's him. Um, and I learned something really important from him. You ready for this? Here's what I learned. He tried a lot of things that didn't work. And my brothers and other people would say, oh, bad idea. And what I figured out was no, great idea, bad implementation. So many of his ideas that didn't work, I learned or I concluded, brilliant, but needs the right implementation to become brilliant. So that's a lesson I learned along the way there.
That is a lesson that you probably see over and over again today in, so many entrepreneurs that have great ideas, but getting them into real life and into practice is a different story. Sometimes it needs
or even what they know is a good idea, but it doesn't work in their firm. And so they've moved on, or they just had a good idea, but they had the wrong person to implement it. So they're gun shy. So it can have like positive and negative sort of stories wrapped around it.
So you took that, you hung your shingle, you decided, hey, I'm gonna exit the business, I'm gonna get into consulting. Where along the lines did you decide? I mean, you had a background in corporate consulting, and even though the family business was pool and landscape related, what made you decide I'm gonna focus on landscape contractors?
I got to tell you what, it was a difficult process, because I came from the corporate world, the big, sexy, big money, big ideas, big issues. And the pool industry is backwards. Sorry, anybody here from the pool industry. It is a generation or two behind the landscape industry. And so, we could go into why that is, but it's just, it's not backwards, but old fashioned. And so I'm thinking to myself, I'm not going to consult in the pool industry. There's no way. And I just didn't see the landscape industry as being big enough. And so I tried different things first. I tried corporate. I thought, somehow I got this idea, I'll become a professional speaker. I don't really know where that idea came from, but it was this idea. And so I started speaking locally, state, regionally, nationally. I joined the National Speakers Association. I joined Toastmasters. I actually took a comedy class in New York City, which was nerve-wracking and a lot of fun.
That's brave.
And I learned some things there. I'm not a professional comedian, or it's hard work. But ultimately I learned, no, not going to be a professional speaker. Their measurement of success is not one I want. The more they sleep away from home, the more successful they think they are. And so, and I realized, speaking's a marketing avenue, not a business. I didn't meet enough successful speakers. There's a bunch, but not a lot. Small circle. And then I realized over time that I had to follow my own advice. My strengths, unique niche, really a big need is the green industry. And so I didn't go straight there. I went there, I don't want to say kicking and screaming, but I went there through this process of elimination that the big, sexy corporate really wasn't the big opportunity. It was picking a niche, which I do teach a lot about and I've learned a lot about, is where I figured I could have the biggest impact. And I learned that my secret passion, I love working with business owners. I love working with entrepreneurs. You don't get that in corporate America, not at all, nowhere. And so really I uncovered my underlying passion, and that's to be found in the small and medium-sized business market.
So when you were getting started and you found out that speaking was more of a marketing avenue and it wasn't something to hang the shingle on, and you decided that niche was sort of the way to go, and obviously the niche that you know was landscape, and I know that you have a passion for watching the impact of good advice and good implementation, and what it does for entrepreneurs that you've worked with. What was like, we all have these origin stories of how we get businesses off the ground and bootstrapping, and what did that look like for you when you were out calling on landscape contractors? Once you've picked your focus, you're going to help landscape entrepreneurs get going.
Yeah.
How did you get started with that? I mean, where does it mean you just start calling landscape contractors from trade organizations, or what?
It is not romantic. I'm listening to a book right now, and the guy talks about how people look at successful entrepreneurs and like they don't realize how hard it is. And it is not easy. Basically, I felt like the postman. Come rain or snow, I will keep trudging through. My wife reminded me of, I had a speaking gig in Michigan, and I was at the airport for 8 hours. And then I finally had to come home because the flight got canceled. And so over Skype, Zoom didn't even exist, I gave the talk. A lot of trudging around, speaking anywhere, and a lot of dialing for dollars, if you will. When I set up my first peer group, we're kind of jumping ahead here a bit, but when I set up that first peer group, I was cold calling. And I, by the way, I said to myself, I'm not too bad at it. I can do it. I actually did a little bit of it in Europe when I was working over there. But again, that's another podcast story. But I said to myself, I don't want to cold call. I don't want to ever have to cold call for business again. So I want to build a market presence where people will call me. And that's underpins a lot of what I do.
Yeah.
I make sure that people know me and will call me, so I don't have to cold call, so to speak, and grovel for business.
Do you remember a time that was your aha, I got this, it's working? Is there a year or a phase in this process that you really felt like marketing was gaining traction and the clients were receiving success?
Well, that's a really good question. And there's probably a few different answers there. So I think it took, if I look back, 3 to 5 years to get traction. I probably got some noticeable in 3 and 5. It really starts to pick up speed. And I think that's common, or I've concluded it's common, that you want to build a brand. If you keep at it steadily, you got to give yourself a 3 to 5 year runway. And so client success, which is sort of part 2 of your question, that takes time. That takes figuring things out and building systems to help clients, and then raising my standards on what I deem as success. And so I've really, I'm very picky. That's not the right word, but I'm careful not to just take on any client doing anything. And I'm really careful to say, no, if you'll work with me in this way, I can almost guarantee success. So that's what I've learned. You work with me in this way, and this certain way, and not just a little of this and a little of that, but you work with me in this certain way, and I can almost guarantee you will be successful. I have also learned that early on, I had some clients that were not successful as they should have been. ADD, no infrastructure. I'm surprised they even got the business to the level it is. And so I realized, okay, I do have to screen out certain types of clients based on, who they are. But basically, if the client's willing to come down and work in my system, which has some high bars to get into, and you have to invest in it, but it almost guarantees an even higher level of success. So that's been my learning process.
Yeah, I mean, it's so neat to see now the overall community of folks that you've helped along the way and still participate via peer groups. And I mean, clearly it's probably difficult for some of the listeners to think back to the time where you were seeking more business versus now where everyone wants to be a part of what you have going on, because there's so many of us that have experienced success. So it's kind of fun to hear you on the other side of that fence trying to get that going. And I know all of us can relate to that feeling. And it's just kind of neat to hear that that's pretty consistent. No matter what kind of business you're starting, you know, the work up front is so difficult until you get results, and then it all kind of comes back.
Takes faith, grinding and faith.
Yep.
I mean, you can't, it's not blind faith, right? It's faith, but always making sure that you've got the right assumptions, right? The right market, the right service, et cetera.
And you played with that, it sounds like, with the service and the client to get the right mix to where you knew what your products were going to be. Is that what brought you to write a book?
Well, the book came early. So the book was part of still thinking I'm going to speak, or somewhere in there. My mind's fuzzy. By the way, I went back in preparation for this. It's great how you can look on your calendar and look all the way back. So I looked all the way back, and God, I had a lot of free time back then on the calendar. And I played an awful lot of golf that first year. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't played that much golf in a while. But the book is like a business card. And so I wanted to speak. And so writing a book helped. And so my first book was A Referral Advantage. I knew a lot about networking and marketing, and it was like a kind of a sub niche in marketing. And that was fun to write. It was a blast. I read Jeffery Gitomer's books. Do you know him?
Yeah.
So I modeled my book format on his book. I took a whole course on this, and they say, pick a book you love, and then you kind of model that person's, without, you don't steal what the content, but you model it. So if you look at my Referral Advantage book, let's see, where is it? It's got to be here somewhere. But if you look at my book and you pull up one of Jeffery Gitomer's books, you say, yeah, they're kind of similar, which is great, right? When you write a book, how do you start? It's a great way to just think about starting. And then my next book was The Leader's Edge, which was the name of my peer group, sort of a way to introduce people to peer groups. And then the third book, Destination Company, that was the home run. And one of my first clients, who's still a client, Dave Wright, you met him.
Yep.
One of my first peer group members, and we're diagnosing a guy's problem, having trouble recruiting. This is a long time ago, during the Great Recession, or right before it maybe, but right around the Great Recession. And he said, you really need to create this destination company. And it stuck, and I built a lot of IP around that, and it became the title of my book and workshops. And that book was so prescient, because now it's all anybody ever talks about is, how do I do that? And back then it was, just a twinkle in my eye, so to speak, but relevant then and relevant now.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny when I just heard you repeat back the books that you've written. They kind of correspond with the phases that your business has taken. You started with the Referral Advantage. So fresh in your mind was, how do I get that referral? I'm building a business. And then you move on to Leader's Edge, which ultimately became kind of the keystone or of your business in terms of the building the peer community and peer-to-peer advice. And now in the more recent times, the Destination Company encompasses all the IP that's been learned from all these different peer-to-peer interactions and best practices, and it's kind of all put together. It's kind of neat to hear how connected that is to your own business, and probably why it was at the forefront of your mind.
And therefore the question is, so what's the next book? Which of course, in theory, I should have written 5 years ago if you follow the same timeline, or 6 years ago. And I've done a lot, workshops and other things, just not in book format. I think, Sean, as I take the next phase of my business, there'll probably be another, maybe I'll have twins and 2 more books will come out.
I don't know. I don't know if I want to take that call with your wife, but we'll we'll graze past that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things for everybody to kind of understand that there's really 2 parts and to your business, and a big part of it obviously is you coaching and helping leaders one-on-one to improve and setting improvement plans, clearly speaking and writing books and kind of getting out there in the green industry. You're well known for doing those things and being a part of every major industry event, certainly that I've been aware of. But the big part is the margin, right? The part in the middle where you've created these communities for people to bond together and develop deep relationships and share best practices and personal relationships to help improve their business and feel like they're not going at it alone. What was the brainchild? Because they're real now there's other people that have started doing that, but you were really the first kind of innovator in our industry to get that out there and get it going. What you mentioned Dave, who I know, and I know there's some other guys out there that were sort of part of that first hurrah, but where did you get that idea and how did you get that off the ground?
I was going to call them my guinea pigs, but it's neither here nor there. Well, I was a member of Vistage, and back then it used to be called Tech, TEC, and Vistage in Canada, by the way, is still called Tech, I think. And Michael Milken, remember him? He got kicked out of Wall Street for cheating, and he bought Tech, turned it into Vistage, and Vistage is now like the largest peer group network in the world for big CEOs. And so I was a member when I was running my family's business, and my Vistage host was like top 10 in the world. So he was awesome. Learned a lot from him. And I just saw it as a model that I could translate to that was totally missing. I wished I was a member of, one of my peer groups when I was running my landscape business, because I got good value from Vistage, but gosh, so many questions unanswered. The landscape business is so different from so many other companies. And so I said, what's missing? Well, good financial comparisons are missing. Deep dives in a person's business where you could really tear it apart and see what's going on. And just general benchmarking, where let's compare and deal with all those comparative issues. And so I borrowed the concept, but then created my own version. And my Vistage host, great guy, he gave me advice on how to set up the first one. He gave me some really good advice. I don't know if I should repeat it here. It is so good, but I followed it and it works. And, he basically taught me how to make other people successful, and to do that by not being too flexible. In other words, there's a level of, nope, here's how we're going to do it. And if you follow this, you'll be successful. And it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that allowed me to help people become successful by that. Don't be too flexible in how you set things up. And I get people to share a lot up front immediately. Sean, right? You join the group, you got to kind of, I don't want to say drop your drawers, but you got to lift up the skirt, drop your drawers, whatever it is.
You got to be vulnerable.
You've got to be willing to share, be emotionally or personally vulnerable, and share data. And so I've learned this skill on how to do that up front, and it just helps. So that's part of the secret. So based on Vistage, and then I made it my own and made it work for the industry.
I think there's a secret sauce too that you didn't hit on, but is very important and impactful. The bond that gets developed between peers so that they, over time, because they were vulnerable up front, because you've not been flexible and helped them to go through a system together, then they have this unique bond that forms, and they, so many entrepreneurs feel like they're going at it alone, and
Yeah.
your peer community is not going at it alone. And I think that's such an ingenious sort of baked in benefit to what you've created, and the benefit that it provides for the members, and for everybody out there that's in a peer group. They know what I'm talking about, and it's just such a nice feeling. And it's just such a great way for you to truly help people and create a support system.
I never really thought about it. I hear from other people that are copying, and they're in a group and they're like, yeah, we have good friends, but we just don't learn enough. Like I hear about other groups where people join and then they break apart, and I'm always scratching my head. How could that be? But as you're helping me self-analyze here, they're missing all these other attributes that really do make My Leader's Edge that much more successful, because it has these underpinnings and techniques and
Because it's
tools.
real. It's
Yeah.
really created a real environment with genuine bonds, and that's it becomes very helpful. So okay, so we know how you got going. We know why you chose the niche. We understand how the peer community idea got kicked off. Tell us a little bit about your first. You got out in the world, you got clients, you started consulting, and you had your first sort of case study. Like, I'm going to help this company. We're going to go through it. What did that look like?
Yeah. Well, there's not like, oh, we sold our first car. There it is. It kind of happens in little pieces, and then bigger pieces, and then, oh, there's a real consulting client. But and so I looked back in my notes to try to find the very first one. And one I really remember, I don't know if he's still in business, Gorgeous Gardens. But I think it was another consultant who felt sorry for me. I don't know what he felt, but he gave me this client, careful what's free, right? Maybe you don't want what's free. I think I was a mess, and I went in to help him, and I haven't talked to him in a long time, a long time. So I don't really know where he is. I looked him up. I couldn't find a big presence. But that was back before I developed my systems that said, here's the funnel, here's the path you've got to take. And so I started doing consulting, and let me just jump to coaching. And there's a dirty secret I learned. I call it a dirty secret. It's not dirty and it's not a secret, but that's what I call it. And it says, it's the following, that consulting doesn't really work. That's the dirty secret. And so what do I mean by that? I can come in and tell you what to do, all this change, lay it out. Here it is, go. 50-50, you're going to implement it. Well, even less than 50%. You're just going to get busy. So I can, and a lot of people, you'll hear this story, Sean, as you start listening for it. A lot of consultants out there charge a lot of money, and they come in and make all these changes. There's national firms, and they still dial for dollars. Can I do a little sidebar?
Absolutely.
Drost, where we're going for the Summer Growth Summit this year, I called him up a couple of years ago. He's like, Jeff, I got a call from this really bigwig consulting firm, and this is back when I'm still working with him. And I'm like, oh, is he about to tell me I'm fired? What's he going to say? And he said, and they said, and this is their pitch, how much cash do you have in the bank right now? And so Bob is like, well, hold on, let me go find out. He doesn't know. He's got to go ask his GM. He gets back and he gets on the phone. He's like, I've got $1 million in the bank. That was the end of that conversation. Oh man, because what they hope to hear is a company that's growing large and is cash poor, and oh, now they're in trouble. They need his help. So it was just great when he told me that. I told him I have over $1 million, and we are so proud of working with you, Jeff. And it was a great story. So these companies will sell a big consulting. They're probably trying to sell them a $100,000 plus consulting thing. But the dirty secret is it's not enough. And so that's why I invented or started doing coaching. And so, and a couple times I've sold consulting without coaching. Once it worked, a few times it really backfired for the client because I didn't sell them my full solution. And so now I remember when I sold my first consulting and coaching, I know exactly where I was. I was in an aquarium during a peer group meeting. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, for those of you listening, and I was watching the porpoise show or the inside show where you're seeing like a porpoise show. I don't know. But in any event, the guy called me up and I was so excited to sell him on the coaching program. Turns out though, that he was very ADHD. And I didn't really have all my systems figured out. I didn't, this was early on, didn't have all my systems figured out. And it allowed him to keep changing direction. Every time we had a call, he was onto something new. And I was still a little bit too flexible then, or didn't have the systems figured out to keep him on path, on program. And so, there's always fits and starts. People will sometimes ask me now, tell me how many of your clients are successful? What percentage? Now I know. And it's like 19 out of 20, and it's probably higher than that, but let's say roughly 19 out of 20 are successful. And here's why. And the 1 out of 20, and it might be 1 out of 40, but let's just, be humble here. 1 out of 20 that aren't successful, they're not implementing. And generally it's for one of these 3 reasons. It's ADHD or no infrastructure or, fill in the blank.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing, I think a lot of landscape contractors can relate to. So a transactional sell where you just come in and tell someone what changes they need to make, and then you're out, doesn't help them out. No different than, building a pool and not sticking around to service it, or installing a landscape and not selling the service package. There's no one there to grow the garden.
Yeah.
And
not selling the service package, letting the client say, no, I can't afford that. Shame on you.
right.
They need it, especially if it's a high design or a lot of, let's say, softscape. Shame on you. You're got to change your own mindset, and then you can change the client's mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I see those two things so interwoven, and the way you've explained it, yeah, anyone can give you good advice, but who's going to stick around to make sure that you implement it properly and encourage you to do it? And a deeper level, here's a whole community of peers that'll hold you accountable for doing it outside of me.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
And on a deeper level, once I started doing that, that's where I realized, oh yeah, working with entrepreneurs is what I love doing. I learned entrepreneurialism at my dad's knee, so to speak, dinner table. So elbows on the table. But I started getting very deep. What's holding back a particular entrepreneur from making the tough decisions? Generally, it's one of any number of personal issues. Could be marriage, could be just some head trash, could be they hired their brother-in-law and that was a big mistake and they can't move on. All kinds of personal items, or they've got burned or they ran out of money. I mean, whatever, all kinds of personal items.
Yeah.
And so the coaching really figures out the personal as well as the business side, because the ultimate success takes figuring the two out.
Well, that's one of the first things that I learned from you. is creating a strong vision. And so many people think that that's fluff, but in practice it's so important. And I mean, I assume that's one of the first things you have to do is establish where are you trying to go.
It is so important, both for you. So you know what, think of it yourself as a compass, north, northwest, south. But then you want to get people on board. What am I getting on board for? Where are we going? And so it really is also, I think it's the first 2 chapters of my book, Destination Company. Let's see, or it's the first 3 chapters. So, and you're saying that's one of the first impacts on your business when we started working together.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Trying to define the vision. And the second part of that, of course, is you see, I can remember clearly standing in a dingy garage with, guys that were just tired and wanted to go home. And you're prompting us to try to decide as a team, what are your values? And at the time I didn't get it. Now I see, the 30,000 foot view, and it's like, well, of course you have to decide where you're headed and what ideals are you going to live by? Like,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah. Chapter 1 and 4 from the book. Absolutely, positively. And it's so foundational. It's almost easy to ignore. And it's so rah. It's almost easy to disbelieve. And yet, if you follow the Bible and believe the story of Moses and God and the 10 Commandments, you want to hold that tribe together and survive and get them from A to B. And we got to start with the set of values.
I found it interesting that in your last podcast, you interviewed someone who is in our industry, but also sort of outside of it because they're running a big department at a university. And one of the first big topics that he wanted to talk about, that he was so excited about, was that he created a vision, a mission, and a set of values that he used to become one of the most beautiful college campuses. And the way that he was encouraging, I thought that was such a cool story, and it ties right back to what I know and one of the first things I learned.
It's interesting. I'm thinking you have to use your vision, mission, vision, and values. You have to put them to work. So if it's just to create them, to put them up on the wall, don't bother. But if you're really willing to use them as a tool, like you would a computer and a shovel, then you'll get a lot of value from them.
And can you tell me a little bit about, so you move past, you get a clearly defined vision, you start working with somebody and coaching them, and you get them to come up with what their team's values are and what the rules that they're going to live by that holds their tribe together. I think from experience, the next place you go is, let's look at your financials. Let's start budgeting for a good, sound business. How do you walk through people to get started? Maybe people have never even thought about how they plan ahead for profit.
Well, let me turn the tables. Do you remember how we did it together? I mean, I know I evolved it because you're a longtime client, but let me just talk about that for a second. So studied engineering, got my MBA, loved saving money as a kid. And so they say you have 2 resources in life, time and money. And so what I really work on with new clients is both of those, right? But without the budget figured out, you have no clue about the money side. It's like blood. You can always work a little harder, right? If somebody quits or you got to put in overtime, but the money part has to work. And so figuring out the budgeting early on, that's how a lot of consultants made their mark in our industry. I shouldn't say a lot, but a couple did, was just the budgeting part. But then software came around and I think sort of made it easier to put budgets together. But I wanted more than just getting a budget together. I wanted clients to figure out their pricing and managing their hours and I think we've come a long way as an industry where people would put budgets together but still not make money, or a lot of money. I talk to clients, oh yeah, I had such and such consultant and we put the budget together. Yeah, but you're not really making any money. And so what I've learned is, okay, there's putting the budget together. That's almost the easy part. But then putting it to use to make the tough decisions is really where the value comes into play. And then I created the rolling budget to sort of give a tool to my clients to not only put their numbers in, but use it as a tool to talk about them every month with their team. And so managing by the numbers, absolutely critical, but then tying that back to pricing and hours and capacity, that's where like some of the softwares really did a great job of help tying that all together. So I'm not sure if I answered your question directly, except, I started off with the rolling budget and just forcing people to create a budget and then use it monthly. Many people don't do that because they don't have time. So now we have to look at their time management and how they spend that other of the two key resources. Where are you spending your time? What are you doing? How do we free up your time so that you can then use the budget and not just put it up on the shelf like you might put your mission and vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a recurring theme, right? The level in which you implement might match the level in which you may be successful. And so, taking those things and putting them into practice instead of just being aware of them are two different things. And
yeah,
I learned the time management part of budgeting, and it took a while. I didn't get it at first, but from what you have done with other companies and getting them to think about, price relative to budget, relative to the amount of time you make for meetings and management and training, and you have to budget for those things, and connecting those two things together, the financial and the leadership in the form of time, was really impactful. And I think that's a big missing link that software is never going to cover. And a lot of people don't quite understand how to monetize those things as costs that you have to have in your business to invest in yourself.
Yeah. Two things you're saying really great. One is softwares they can help you make money, but they don't teach you strategy. They don't teach you pricing strategy. And there's even consultants out there that say, oh, 12%, that's what you should be making. Where did they get that number from? And why do they pick such what I'm gonna call low number? I have a thought on where they got it from, but it's like, oh my God, you will hit your goals. So careful what goals you set for yourself. You will hit your goals.
I think that's sort of a good, in general, one of the biggest takeaways that I've learned as just being around the peer community and around you as a person is just, be careful of what goal you set. And most people aim so low, including myself. I never saw what was possible until I got out there a little bit and talked to other people that were crazier than I.
Yeah.
And it worked. And it's like, oh, well, if he can do it and he sets high, and you say aim high, hit high, right? And that's a huge takeaway that I think it's important. So how do you encourage owners to do that? How do you break them out of their status quo or their head, what the limit is, to increase it?
I just want to go back to one thing you said before about meetings. When you talk to somebody about the meetings that they need to implement to manage by the numbers, oh my God, I can't afford that. It's like, you can't afford not to do this. You need to understand the value of your time much higher in meetings, quite honestly. And then the education and the empowerment you can impart all of a sudden raises the value and the abilities of the people in that meeting. Now they can apply more value when they leave. And so maybe that will be the next book. But so back to beyond the status quo. I love adventure. I'm never satisfied with eating at the same restaurant, traveling to the same place. My wife and I are a good combination, even though I convinced her, or she convinced herself, I guess should say, to move from Holland, move here. So she took that first big step. But, I guess that took me first traveling overseas and then coming back. And so she's the stable one and I'm the adventurous one. And we make a great partner, because I'll be like, let's go to this new level, this new area. And she keeps things balanced and, we make a good partnership. So I'm inherently hardwired for pushing myself, learning new things, challenging. I have to admit to you, I hate reading. Don't tell anybody that. I was never a good reader. Why do you think I studied engineering? It's difficult for me to read, to stay focused. I must be ADD. I read a lot and I have to push myself. We work with a lot of people where they're like, well, I don't read books. I'm thinking to myself, yeah, me neither, but I still do. Because you have to constantly improve and stay on the leading edge of learning. Otherwise, you get left behind. Time marches forward. So if you're not on the edge, then the gap grows and you're behind. So I think from my personal DNA is where that challenging the status quo and setting higher goals really comes from.
So you take, or you draw upon your own personal experience of pushing hard, always trying to learn, traveling and exploring, which as peer group members, we all get to do, explore someone else's business in a different town and see something totally different, talk to people from around the country. These are all the ways that you feel like you're able to push the status quo with landscape contractors.
Yeah. There's a lot of fallacies out there. You can't learn a language once you're past 5. I'm not bragging here, but I moved to Germany and I learned German, and I learned it in 9 months. I mean, I was driven and focused and I was curious, but I was 21. I got pretty good at it. And then I learned Dutch because I moved to Holland, and I mean, they're similar, and I'm still shocked that I can fake my way through Spanish. I only took it from 6th grade to 9th grade or something. So, you're taught you can't learn a language when you're older. Now you can do anything you want to. It just takes a bit of drive, curiosity, and yeah.
Your wife shared that with me. She shared that you have a drive within you to get good at anything you set your mind to, and that was an endearing quality that she enjoys about you. And you've just described for us that that's the secret to challenging the status quo.
It's an endearing quality. I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah, she did. So in what we've been talking about as far as coaching, to me, it sounds like leadership looks like being a good coach. If you're saying that consulting help is not transactional, ideally it's a relationship, and in providing that coaching ongoing is what helps in your business to help landscape contractors. So are you then saying that leadership overall is more like coaching?
Tell me what you think. When did you have that aha?
I think I've had that aha only very recently, because I've had the freedom to invest in coaching. It's not a transactional relationship. It's an ongoing one where you listen and you help and you encourage and you push, but you don't do.
Yeah.
And I think that's, that's an intangible aha that sort of happens over time. And at least that's what I've learned.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said it well, Sean. Coaching is not doing. And, you can own a business and somebody else runs it, or you can own and run the business and be the coach to the other leaders. So when you're not doing, sure, there's managing, metrics, etc. But when you're trying to bring people up to do better, coaching is the best way. People say they hate being interrupted by somebody who has a problem. That's like the perfect spot to be a coach. All right, give me two alternatives and tell me which one you think is best. My clients will often say, I think they say it as a joke, but they'll be like, man, you never answer our questions. And so there's coaching and consulting. Sometimes I'll be like, no, do this. That's me being the consultant. I was talking today with somebody and he's like, when are we ready to hire a controller? I said, because of this reason and this reason, you're ready right now. Consultant, let's get that position in place. Coach, I really got this problem. And I'm like, tell me how you would handle it. I'm listening for sound thinking, good conclusion. And when they're off, I'll be like, I'm not sure I would do that. I think I would do this. Why don't I say it up front? First off, they have to live with the decision. I want that they have to live with the decision. I get to go home, or I am home, but I get to leave and they're stuck with it. So they better feel really confident about it and be okay if it doesn't work. And so I think that's really important. So same in your own company, right? When a manager comes to you, you want them to live with it as if they owned that division, where they're going to be, no matter what happens, they reason through it and they own that decision. And so I think it's a good skill for that reason as well.
I think, for landscape contractors, if anybody follows baseball, if you said, hey, our pinch hitter's hurt, and so we're going to send in coach, everybody would be like, what? Of course you wouldn't do that, right? So, in the sports world, the coach would never sub in a game. He might know the plays, he might understand the game or what's going on in the game, but clearly no one would ever suggest that a head coach come in and play in a game. And so but somehow as entrepreneurs, we just think that we should solve problems for people, or, oh, we're having an attendance problem, so I'm going to hop in and do the work. And, if nobody's steering the ship, you're headed nowhere fast. So I think that's a really important lesson to impart on people, that leadership is coaching.
I've heard people say, well, I'm waiting for him or her to prove themselves before I give them more authority. And of course, that's backwards. What you want to think is the way I think, which is, I want them to actually act like the owner of that fill in the blank. What if they were the owner of that division? I couldn't tell them what to do, and I couldn't jump in. So if you think that way and treat them like an owner, they'll act like an owner.
Right. Which, how important is communication then for an owner?
I'll tell you what, as a consultant, the number one recurring problem I find is inadequate communication from the owner on down. Number one issue, most recurring, and it's a different flavor in every company, but it's there in every single company. And all owners suffer from some form of ESP. There's some movie where this girl says, I have ESPN. It's like a play on ESP. I don't know what punchline that is from what movie, but I'm always thinking about that movie. Because all owners think, oh, I have ESP, or my employees have ESP. I say it once, and then they think about it as often as I think about it. That's the biggest hurdle that's the most impactful hurdle, that when you overcome it, things really take off. I'm sure you've seen that in your business.
Totally. I think you could apply that to lots of areas in your life. That's probably a big reasons why marriages fail, because if you're not communicating with your spouse, if you don't tell the other person what you need or you want, then, you guys don't understand each other. And so, of course, in business, you might have 40 relationships under one roof that you're trying to manage. And if you're not communicating, then no one knows what you need or want from them, and vice versa. And it can get out of hand. So, and of course with clients.
Yeah. When your employees can read your mind and finish your sentence, I'm sorry, when your employees can know what you're going to say and finish your sentence, you've done a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. One of your podcast clients down there in New Orleans, Mullen, said that he saw the job of a CEO as chief communications officer. And I thought that was so clever. That was such a good way of kind of defining what a leader's role is in a business, is to make sure that communication stands. And you say it and you say it again.
So Sean, obviously this might be the longest podcast I've ever done. We may have to split into two, but let's jump to the lightning round where you have some surprise questions for me.
Jeff, I have a question for you. I'm wondering if you can tell us about a time, and you're gonna have to think way back, but I got this whisper that told me of a time you were so interested in the Financial Times that while you were supposed to be cleaning pools, you may have employed someone to help you so you could get caught up. Can you tell us a little bit about that incident?
That probably was me working with my sister, if I'm remembering correctly. And Financial Times for sure. And then there was this other magazine where you could buy used car parts, because my first car was a BMW that I was always buying parts for. And I sat in the truck and I made her go out and clean the pools. She has not forgiven me for that, I don't think.
Did your dad find out?
Oh, probably. Wait, did you talk to my dad?
I did my homework.
There you go. That's all I'm going to say.
I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit about the most interesting suntan you've ever gotten.
Really? You're going there? Most interesting suntan. I'll tell you the parts that are appropriate, rated G for G audiences. But I went to Tulane. It's 3.5 hours from Pensacola, which hands down that area, most beautiful beaches in Florida, not way down south, but up on the Panhandle. And so we would often do a nighttime drive. We might be out partying, etc. And then we would drive overnight, leave at 2, get there at whatever that is, 5:30, fall asleep on the beach. And apparently I fell asleep on the beach with my hand on my stomach. And when I got back to school after the weekend, I was bright red, except for this white outline on my stomach for my hand.
When I heard the story, I think your buddy said that you actually kind of showed it off around campus like it was a badge of honor.
Exactly. How else would, yeah, exactly.
So we all know that you're into fast cars and that you love music, but can you share with us a little bit how you got into music and sort of what you play, what you like, where it started for you? Were you in a band?
Oh, okay. So my dad is big time into music. Big time. Now, remember I said he was a little artsy, or he is very artistic. So he was in a classical and opera. I now listen to opera on Sundays sometimes because my dad would play it all the time and take us to operas where we would fall asleep and scream. And I hated it. And now it's a great way to calm things down on a Sunday. But he hardwired every bedroom in our house. There's 5 kids and 4 siblings. He gave us all really nice speakers, Advent, which is a brand, nice wooden box. We all had our own little sound system in our rooms. My dad had these huge quadraphonic Macintosh speakers and, super amplifiers and preamps. He would let us play music as loud as we wanted on his system. I used to play Frankenstein by, what's his name? I can see his photo. It'll come to me in a second, but the song was Frankenstein, really loud. Oh yeah, the Edgar Winters band. He was a what do you call it when someone's kind of white and red eyes, um, and blonde hair, in any event. So, and he would let me play that for my friends and play it as loud as I wanted. The whole neighborhood could hear it from these huge speakers. So my dad loved music, classical and opera only, but he allowed us the space to love our music. And then of course my mom made me take piano lessons as a child, and I hated my piano teacher, and I ran away once and wouldn't come down the stairs because I didn't want to play for him. And yeah, so both my parents, we had a grand piano at home. My mom played, she sang. My dad played and sang, and came from them. But I ended up loving, jazz, blues, Southern rock. I love everything, really, all kinds of music.
Nice. Well, I think we've learned a lot about you, about your business, and about some of the things that drive success in, the clients that you have, and what's driving them to push harder and push that status quo and be better. I so appreciate you allowing me to turn the tables and ask you some questions so that we can dive a little deeper into your secret sauce. And, I think we had a good time hearing things that maybe some of us didn't know.
Sean, you did an excellent job. Really, really good. And this has been a lot of fun. I was a bit nervous, as you could imagine. Hopefully some people will listen to this, or have, and they got to this point here. And, reach out if you want to learn more, is my little call to action at the end here. Sean, thank you so much.
Thank you.